All right, we got the message.
Okay. All right. So when the food is prepared in prep, especially if you're working in large food service establishments, this week football started, right? Everyone's been watching Sunday, Monday night, Thursday night. They've hitting record numbers. If you watched last night's game, it went into overtime. It was an excellent game. Well, in these large stadiums, they're doing large amounts of food. There is 70 to 100,000 people that eat in these venues. You have many different outlets and many different restaurants, but even if you break that down to the number of restaurants and the number of portions they're going to make, they're still going to be serving 500 to 1,000 people at least. So if you're making large batches of chili, large batches of, stews, casseroles, sauces, you cool them down. We don't make them to order. Part of our production or prep sheet is to prepare ahead of time. So when we prepare ahead of time, these are considered potentially hazardous food, meaning we have to handle them correctly. We have to put them in smaller vessels, ice them down, bring them to about 40 degrees. Then we can combine them all together. Once they're all 40 degrees, then we cover, label, and we date, and we rotate them. Now, if a large venue, college, university feeding, healthcare, you're producing this amount every other day, you have to rotate correctly. So if your chefs and cooks are not putting something in and rotating FIFO, first in, first out, and you have something that's older and older dated in the back, you know to throw that out. Or as I said earlier, if you have a cook that takes a vessel, a bain-marie insert or a soup insert, and they put it on an open flame and reheats it, that's incorrect. You do not do that. Or if that vessel's been left out overnight, you throw it out. And I've seen many scenarios where in New England, when I work the islands, we make a lot of chowders and a lot of bisques. People forget to put them in the walk-in cooler. And I'm talking large quantities of 5-gallon buckets. And you say, well, man, this cost me a lot of money. This is so expensive, or I'm going to be behind today in prep because I have to start from scratch and make it. You have to do that. I know it's difficult, it's challenging, but if you don't do that and you say, I'm going to reheat this, and that's been out all night long, developing pathogenic bacteria, it's worse to have an outbreak because then they're going to shut your restaurant down until they can investigate. Your customers won't come back because you've, it's been announced on social media and on the local news that you had an outbreak. Your manager is probably going to lose his job. The chef will probably lose their job. So there's a lot of ramifications that you have to think of, the domino effect of you being a kitchen manager, a chef, or cook, making that decision. So yeah, it's difficult. You might have to, the term we use in the industry is 86. 86 means we're out of it. So you might have to 86 that soup for the day. You might have to just tell them we're out. And you're better off doing that than you are getting people sick and the repercussions of not properly handling food. There are certain foods that are cooked that can be held within 4 hours that before they're chilled or reheated. That is the Haccp or Serve Safe Managers guidelines. I check all foods. I really make sure if it's a highly potentially hazardous food, let's say it's fish or shellfish or something like that, I would discard it, but know that certain foods can be held within 4 hours. When preparing cold foods, wear gloves. There was a law at one time in California where they told you to wear gloves all the time. So cooks were wearing gloves on the hotline. Well, now they've changed that law because what happened was they learned that cooks were actually washing their hands less. They were wearing gloves throughout the whole service, and they were contaminating the gloves, and they thought that since they had the gloves on, they wouldn't get anyone sick. Well, they learned that this was worse because individuals were not changing their gloves. So if you do wear gloves and you choose to wear them throughout service, just like you wash your hands, you have to change your gloves just as frequent. So if you're not wearing gloves and you wash your hands every time you change production methods or you change prep, you'll constantly see me washing my hands all the time. It becomes habit over the years. But the same thing goes with wearing gloves. You have to change them. Now remember, if you nick yourself or you cut yourself and you have to bandage, the hand where you wear the bandage has to be double gloved. Okay, that's the standard, right? So if I'm plating a salad and I'm putting cold lettuce on the plate and I'm putting my garnishes on the plate, you have to wear gloves because we're not reheating that food. We're not cooking it. That's why they're saying on the hotline, food is raw, we're cooking it, we're bringing it up to the internal temperatures, we're killing the outside, we're killing the pathogenic bacteria, if there is any, and we're bringing it up to temp. So that's the difference, okay? I recommend you constantly change your cutting board, you constantly change your utensils. The more of these type of practices that you implement in your kitchen as a manager, a chef, a cook, the less chance you have for an outbreak of food poisoning, pathogenic. So you mix a salad, right? And you go to do something else with that same spoon, or let's say you just rinse it or wipe it with a towel. It's still contaminated. So it's very important that you just take it to the 3 compartments so you can get a new one, okay? Very important. So cross-contamination. So have a utensil for each food item. Do not use one serving spoon or one ladle. You go into one item, then you go into another item. That's cross-contamination. Everything should have its own serving utensil. If you drop the utensil on the floor, or if you don't know where that utensil's been used, when in doubt, take it to the dish sink. Change it. Very important. Be smart. Okay, when we handle glassware, this was one of my biggest pet peeves when I was director of the food and beverage operations, and I was in the dining room working the floor with the servers. And it drives me crazy. There's 2 things that servers will do is they put their fingers inside of dirty cups and then they carry them to the dish room. They don't wash or sanitize their hands, and the chef is calling out, pick your food up. So now their hands are contaminated from a guest who's been drinking out of a glass when they're picking up food. The other thing that drove me crazy is that they stacked the cups. And it was like a game. I've won one restaurant. You see on the bottom left screen where they're stacking and carrying it. I saw one restaurant where a server was stacking dirty cups and carrying them out. It was like a game to the individual on how many cups they could get stacked and taken back to the dish room. When I was a server, managing the floor of the servers didn't like it because I made them use small trays and they had to clear the table with small trays. We were in a 5-star resort, a Marriott signature property. Every restaurant, they use small trays. I didn't like them taking the bus tubs out and loading them up. Breakfast, we were busy all the time because we were in a resort on a captive island. People couldn't go anywhere, so they ate at the restaurants in the hotel. And what I would see is them leaving with bus tubs and just stacking them up. The bus tubs came directly from the dish room. They had dirty, soiled food on them. They're going to the tables. You use a clean, round cocktail server's tray, and you can serve or pick up small items. Or you set up a tray jack on a big oval tray, and you clear the dirty dishes away from the guests so the guests can't see that. My servers didn't like that. They, thought it was more work, etc. But think of if your hands are soiled, you're clearing a dirty table, and you're going back and you're picking up food. This happens every day on a regular basis. I could tell you that right now, right? So that you're going to be supervisors, you're going to be managers. It's your job to make sure that you're running an organized, neat, clean operation. So it wasn't just part of it was professionalism, that we look professional, and you have to do those things to get a 5-star rating. The other was sanitation. Just look at the pictures, how you're taking dirty dishes back to the dish room, then you're setting a table, right? Or you're taking dirty dishes back to the dish room and you're buttering a bagel for a guest. right? One thing we don't want to do on the far right, where you see the glassware in the ice machine, never do that, because if that glass chips or breaks, you have to thaw out the ice machine, you have to melt all that ice, you have to find that broken piece of glass. Especially behind the bar, when you're working the bar as a bartender, it's quick. You use a scoop, okay? The scoop, according to the health department, if you're being inspected, do not leave the scoop inside the ice. That's where I told you you have to have it nearby in a holder, in a container. A lot of people like to use a little cord to hold it off to the side. Some places, like in our establishment on the islands, we always wrapped our silverware. We stacked them. So that was part of the side work that the servers had to do. Again, keep these in a nice, neat, clean area. If we were doing large events and banquets, we'd wrap 1,000 or so at a time. But you want to make sure that they're clean, they're kept in a clean, stored area, because the next day or the next morning, you're going to be setting them out on the tables. We're all aware of sustainability today. So we want to use sustainable containers for takeout or curbside delivery. Sustainable means that they're biodegradable. Some of these styrofoam ones that people use, they don't break down into garbage. They're made by oil companies, plastic companies like DuPont and other companies. So we want to use sustainable type containers now. They're a little bit more expensive. But if you want to go and get LEED certification on your property, LEED certification goes from ordering, storage, to garbage, to your disposable items, on how efficient your property operates on paper products, electricity. All these are taken into consideration. Are you a sustainable business? And do you have a sustainable business plan? Well, in the islands in Hawaii, they passed a law where you cannot use any plastic straws. They were showing pictures of sea turtles with straws through their nose, and they were there permanently. So this has been banned. Plastic bags have been banned in most all of California. I'm surprised that Florida hasn't done that yet. And I know where I live in Boca in the Delray area, they're looking at bans on plastic bags. They end up on the beaches, they end up all over. All of us have seen the TV shows and the commercials where there's a plastic island out in the ocean the size of Texas, made up of all plastic that's not biodegradable. So it's a problem, and we as food service industry professionals have to help resolve that solution by using biodegradable paperware. Okay, most places do not allow you, especially with COVID right now, this first statement where it says you're allowed to refill glasses, you're not. So every time you get a new Coke or drink for an individual on a table, you need to get a new glass for them, okay? If you do go through a buffet, you can't reuse your plate. You have to have a new plate. A lot of places are not doing buffets now because of COVID, because people have to stand in line, the contamination. So many places are not doing buffets. If you do see a buffet, that Las Vegas, last night's football game was in Vegas, they're known for their big buffets in the hotels. And if any of you have never been to Las Vegas and you're going to stay in food service, you need to go to Vegas, because the hotels are all 5-star. It's the most traveled convention area in the world. Most hotels have many restaurants. It just blows you away when you see the food service or establishments. The employees' cafeterias for most of those hotels serve 2,000 to 3,000 people. And most of the employees' cafeterias are in the basement property of the hotel. So they serve large lines of food. So you do not want to reuse plates, containers, dishware. They have to be rewashed or thrown out. A lot of places now, because of COVID, are not putting reusable condiments on the table, like you see mustard, ketchup, relish. chutneys and garnishes. They're not doing that now. You're seeing more disposable. So you're not seeing bottled ketchup or things like that. You're seeing packages now. And a lot of that has to do with because of COVID. And your suppliers now are getting more creative with their types of packaging that they're using on the tables for disposable. Even breadsticks now, chopsticks in your Asian restaurants now, we're seeing them individually wrapped, bread, crackers individually wrapped because of what's happening with COVID right now. It is mandatory that buffets now have to have sneeze guards. Each state has a regulation on how far it has to be away from the food, how high it has to be. It's mandatory now. Okay. You have to have labels on all the food. Most places in many states now require that you have the nutritional ingredients. When I did the luau in Hawaii, what I did was I had hard menus printed with the nutritional elements on the menu. I had another recipe card with all of the allergens and all the food. So if we were serving 3,000 people a night, and we had many buffets. So maybe 50 to 100 people would go through one buffet. So we had them all over. If a guest came up to me, because they saw me in my chef whites, even though I was a director of food and beverage, I would be out on the floor in my chef whites managing. They would come up to me and say, chef, I'm allergic to something. Can you tell me what's in their food? I would go over to a side station, grab one of the cards, hand it to the guest, and show it to them so they knew when they would go through the buffet what they could pick or select. You also have to be prepared at times when the guests will say, I cannot go through the buffet, and they have to order out of the kitchen. This is something that we had to do. So we would always have, make sure we had available items to cook quickly or to put together in a quick manner and bring to a guest that could go through a buffet. It's common knowledge, it's common practice today. When we design menus today, we don't think of vegan or vegetarian dishes as last minute. They're designed when we actually write or design our menus. And so if you're working in an establishment like Las Vegas or a college university setting or a cruise line, healthcare that have straight line feeding buffets, take this in consideration. Have a printed menu, have all the ingredients listed, have another menu or the same menu with all of the allergens listed, what type of oils you're using, what type of nuts, what type of seafood, anything that you can think of that would create an allergen listed. So when a guest comes up, you don't have to verbally constantly go through the menu with them. You can present it to them and discuss it with them while they're looking on. Okay, so we keep food hot, keep food cold. There's your temperatures. Make sure you're studying the exam. At different times, at different years, the temperatures might say 40 to 135 or 140. Study your textbook and go by the exams in your textbook. Every year, the temperatures vary a little bit, but you'll know on the exam because they're really out there. They're not close. Keep your fish cold. If you're doing an open raw bar, that's why you always see ice. If you're doing a cook station, that's why the cook station will have a refrigeration so that all the mise en place is all set inside. If not, you use refrigeration tables or you use iced containers. You put your meat or fish in the ice containers and you put them down in the ice so they stay at temperature. You don't keep them out all day, you rotate them. Constantly restock. So the more you change your hot soups, that's why I was giving you the example of where we constantly reheated soups and refilled our inserts. New inserts, don't just dump it into the old one. Constantly doing that throughout service. In New England, we were doing 450 to 500 people in a 3-hour period during dinner. We constantly made sure it was 1 gallon on the steam line, like you're seeing in this picture, but we constantly reheated. It was always coming up fresh on the front line. Well, before service, we'd set up a whole bunch of sauce pots with a gallon full, ready to go, and we just fire back to the prep cooks, fire soup, and they're constantly dumping them into new bain-maries and bringing them up to the hot line. And the reason why was because we wanted it hot. The smaller the container, the hotter you'll keep the soup. If you're using a very large container, you're gonna burn the bottom, or if you go to check the temperature, the middle won't be hot. Your ladle, you're distributing from the middle, the guest isn't gonna get a hot bowl of soup. Okay, so make sure everything is labeled. Make sure you're following all the regulations and laws for a temperature controlled food, which is like already food that you purchased. Follow the directions of cooking and holding. Manufactured, have them listed. When you deliver off-site, on all these resorts that I worked at, we delivered food throughout the resort. We had packages where people could have picnics, where they could have outdoor events or catered events. This picture in the top right is a Cambro. Cambro keeps food hot for a certain period of time. We had golf carts that were specifically designed with hot boxes on them. A lot of times these Cambros are stackable. A lot of times we had a one-time event when we were serving lunch where it would take 1 hour to serve. So we'd load these Cambros up, we'd load them on a cart or a four-wheeler or a golf cart. We would deliver them, set the buffet or serve the meal, and then we would take the Cambro cart back to the main kitchen. Everything was held according to temperature. We followed the guidelines. Now, if you load the Cambro up, you're taking temperatures before you load the Cambro. Once you're serving or setting the buffet up or serving the plated meal, you're taking temperatures of the same food as it's being brought out of the Cambro. It still has to be that same temperature. So there are many different type of units that you can purchase through Cambro or Rubbermaid. These are institutional type cooking and holding units, cold Cambro, hot Cambro. So you'll get familiar with that with your vendor. They're seeing now a lot of vending machines on campuses and colleges and business industry accounts. So they have to have the date, the ingredient label, nutrition. It has to have the sell-by date. So if your vendor comes in and they're rotating the sandwiches, they have to take out the old, outdated sandwiches. A lot of college, universities, B&I accounts, healthcare accounts have a contract with companies that sell sandwiches. They will give you credit, so you want to make sure you have a credit plan in place where if they don't sell a certain number of sandwiches and they're outdated, you get a certain percent of your money back. Generally, it's not 100%, but that's something that you negotiate with that vendor. But it's a temperature-controlled, safe food, so we have to follow all the Haccp guidelines and principles. Okay, so again, we're following the Haccp strategies. We were discussing food production. When we discussed the Haccp concepts, remember many years ago, these strategies weren't put into place. Haccp is hazardous analysis critical control point, taking temperatures throughout production, maintaining those temperatures, recording those temperatures, and taking corrective actions. All of this is part of your Haccp strategy. You can alleviate outbreaks of foodborne illness if you follow these strategies and you live them to the letter of the law, and you're not lenient or lackadaisical. Okay, does anyone have any questions or comments?